Thank you, Michael, and thank you very much, Chief, for being here. I'm as Arnold said, I'm very, very pleased to be able to address you here this afternoon, and really appreciate your time for being here. One of the issues we've talked about education for the Aboriginal community and bringing that up, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, everything that has been discussed here this afternoon, I agree with completely. But another avenue that isn't discussed as much is that we also need to educate the settler population as to the historical injustices, as to the plight of First Nations, and as to the cultural values. And I really want to emphasize the cultural values that and the pride that that should be instilled within all of our peoples as to the historical and cultural heritage of First Nations, just as is the case in New Zealand. I use an example. I mean, that is front and center of their nationhood. And I think that in order to better establish that relationship, that nation-to-nation relationship, it's equally important to make sure that we educate our settler peoples as well. And I think it's but in the past that's always been done by settlers. We've defined the curriculum. We've defined how we're going to provide that education in that historical and cultural context, and have done a very poor job of it. I just reflect back on my own education and the lack thereof, actually. And so I guess I'd like to put it to you: is our First Nations ready to? I know you've got a lot to take care of on your own front, but are you in a position to be able to assist settlers to help to define that curricula, to deliver the materials that would be needed to define that curricula, and what are your thoughts on that in general? Thank you.
Great question. Educating the settlers. It's interesting, your terminology. And when we deal with the premiers, we ask them to change the curriculums for sure, to teach treaties and inherent rights and Aboriginal rights. So all schools, for example, in Saskatchewan have to teach treaty rights, all the treaties. Same starting in Manitoba. So changing the curriculum, not only on reserve but off reserve. So change one to teach treaty and Aboriginal rights and title, that has to be taught. The second piece is to start changing curriculums to teach the impacts of the residential schools, the history about colonization and oppression, and the impacts of the residential schools, the intergenerational effects of the residential schools. Those have to be taught not in all the schools from K to 12, you know. It's also got to be taught to the immigrants coming into Canada. What's their orientation? You know, they swear their allegiance to the laws of Canada. There's a recommendation that TRC calls to action to swear allegiance to the treaties as well. Like, so there's education awareness for the immigrants coming in through that process when they become official Canadians. All 338 members of Parliament should go through a misconception training. When you get elected to a member of Parliament, I would love to see, you know, and I've been asked by certain members of Parliament to come to do a misconception training for us because we don't know anything about inherent rights or treaty rights or what this nation-to-nation relationship may look like. So that has to be done as well. So I totally agree with the question. Changing the curriculums now, right across Canada. There's some things that can be done on a national perspective for the 338 members of Parliament, new immigrants coming into Canada, is that education awareness will lead to understanding, will lead to action.